Okay, here we are. We're recording. And this is episode 9, session 9 of Roaming Free Inside the Cage. And are you all finding that is the if you look at your emails that I send out afterwards, is that summary, that AI summary, is that helping at all? Is that useful at all? Anybody use it at all? Not a single person. Oh, maybe a couple of them. All
Oh,
right. Good. All right. Just wondering.
Well, I find it takes the generalities, the gist of it, but it doesn't capture the nuance.
Well, of course not. Who could
Well,
capture this nuance? Nobody
we
could capture this nuance.
we can.
That's what
Anyway,
I mean. You got to be here. There's certain things you must be present to win. That's all there is to it. Absolutely. All
That's the best that it missed a lot. So for me, it helps me kind of catch up with you.
right. Okay. All right. Well, it's there if you need it. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, open up your email next time and see what you think.
Dave, question for you about that. Do you
Yes?
feel like the AI is grabbing what actually happened here in a way that's useful, or is it too nuanced for AI to even be useful?
It's like Ellen says, what is there is amazingly accurate.
Mm.
I mean, it really does capture the top level executive summary type of issues. But yeah, it doesn't get into the weeds at all. So if you read through the summary, it does give you the flow of the conversation pretty well. And it even names the different people who are speaking, which I think is really cool because I don't
Right.
know if it actually can actually read off of our blocks who is speaking because we don't introduce ourselves when we talk. So it must be so that kind of surprised me, but it'll actually, identify who the speaker is. So yeah, it does a good job for what it is. But if it was just a business meeting or something like that, it would probably be very useful, because you could get the basic bullet points of what's going on. For something like this, not quite so much, but like Jerry says, it at least gives you a sense of the flow of the conversation. So it's for what it is, it doesn't take me that long to paste it over. So what the heck?
I read it.
Thank you.
I read
Great.
it every week.
Thank you. That validates my existence. I appreciate that. All right. We're going to jump into Appendix C. This is self-transformation and the pivot of Tao. And these were the two appendices that I wanted to get into before we go back and dig into the first chapter. I thought it really would be good for us to get this grounding before we go back rather than at the end of the book. And hopefully you're feeling the same way. This one's going to be a little more mind-bendy because we're going to be talking about the Tao and hopefully giving you a sense of how the Tao does connect to the Enneagram. So he's going to try to draw a little bit more of a connection between those two. Before we dig into that, was there anything from last week that wasn't fully developed or anything you've been thinking about that you wanted to mention? One ringy dingy, two ringy dingy. Okay. All right. Well, let's dig in here. This one, I think there's not, well, I should say, I was going to say this one should probably just flow more in terms of reading, but we always find stuff to talk about in bunny trails. So who knows how long this is going to take us. But I don't think anyone has ever suggested that there is a direct lineage between Taoism and the Enneagram, although both belong to a common world tradition of reflection upon mystical experience, the Philosophia Perennis that we talked about, that perennial wisdom, perennial philosophy. The question of how the two understandings relate or do not relate to one another is a long and complicated one. This book is meant to lay out a practical way to use the Enneagram for spiritual growth from a Taoist perspective. In the main text of the book, I tried not to distract the reader with philosophical or theoretical questions. However, some readers may want to examine the notion of the pivot of Tao in a more precise and methodical way. Such an inquiry has its usefulness for understanding what transformation really means. That is, what actually happens for ordinary people like you and me as we use the Enneagram in our spiritual work. So he kind of laid out in those last few sentences why I wanted to read this now at the top of the book rather than at the end. But that
Hey,
last sentence,
Dave, real quick, what page are you on? I'm sorry.
oh, for crying out loud, Doug.
I lost
167.
167?
Yes, toward the end of the
Oh,
book.
okay. I thought you said 157. Okay, never mind.
Oh, it's funny. So that last sentence on the paragraph, such an inquiry has its usefulness for understanding what transformation really means. What transformation really means. I mean, how often do we really take time to define that, right? That is what actually happens for ordinary people like you and me as we use the Enneagram in our spiritual work. And so that he's kind of setting up another kind of a purpose for the book overall. We can approach the issue with the following question. How many points of view are there in the Enneagram? All right, just off the top of your head, real quick, how many points of view are there in the Enneagram?
9.
9.
Mhm.
William, how many?
Well, I guess you can think of all the different combinations, like the subtypes and the wings and the
Oh, wow, he's going to get all
Many,
technical on us.
hundreds.
yeah, it's infinite.
I say infinite, as many as there are people in
Infinite.
the world.
It's fluid.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So how many points of view are there in the Enneagram? That is, does the Enneagram demonstrate that there are 9 points of view and only 9? Or is there a 10th, the true perspective?
Mm.
In other words, must we make do with just 9 partial and limited ways to pay attention to, interpret, and react to life? Or are we searching for the one true essential way to pay attention to, interpret, and react to it? The question is not an idle one. It goes to the heart of why we study the Enneagram. Are we trying to end up with a polished and more presentable Enneatype? Or are we looking to create the perfect person who is beyond type? Or then again, do we seek something else quite entirely? Let us try to make this more concrete by considering 2 people in a hypothetical but not untypical situation. The first, possibly a 6, says, "Here am I, angry with you because you have stood in my way, preventing me from accomplishing what I wanted and needed to do, all the while posing as my friend. I am enraged as much by your hypocrisy as by your opposition." Does that sound like a 6? And the other, possibly a 9, says, "Here am I, wounded by your unending and unfair criticism of me. I have never wished you ill and never tried to hurt you. But you make a monster of me to everyone, so much so I now avoid you at all costs." Now, in actuality, most people would never be this direct with one another. They would probably say these things to friends and colleagues rather than to one another. Or perhaps they would simply repeat such thoughts to themselves in their heads. That's what we usually do, right? So what's the true situation? Who's right and who is wrong? Could both be right or both wrong? And how could we ever know? If there are 9 and only 9 points of view, it seems we are forever prevented from knowing the total truth about anything, for we can only see from our limited perspectives. On the other hand, there might be a 10th perspective, say that of essence. The goal of spiritual work would then be to reach a deeper level of knowing that gives access to the capacity to understand events, people, and self as they actually are. If we reach it, we can transcend our type, get over our arguments, and find a way to live in true harmony within ourselves and with one another. The problem is, who could discover and teach that 10th view? Suppose I were the lucky one. Suppose I reached such a high level of spiritual awareness that I could now tell you in simple yet elegant language the true goal of life and how you can attain it. I become the enlightened guru that you are, and you are the eager student. But I would still have to teach you about that goal and the manner of its attainment from my perspective as a 6. And you would still have to listen to me from your perspective of whatever type you happen to be. So the spiritual truth, even if it exists, seems to be inherently unreachable. Consider Jesus. He probably possessed the real deal, or at least was as close to it as anyone else, or closer to it than anyone else. Yet with all due respect to many good Christians, how much luck did Jesus have transmitting the central core of his message to others? So we are left with a dilemma. Either there are 9 partial viewpoints and we can never escape them, or there is a 10th true perspective, but no one can show it to us in a way we are capable of grasping. Ooh, ah. How does that strike you? Any thoughts or comments on that?
Unbelievable.
Keep reading.
Just a lot of
All right.
health
Well,
off. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's like you said, who's going to really confront somebody like that? Come on. In reality.
I'm sorry, what, George? Who's going to what?
Who's going to confront people like that? You got in my way. You did this. You did that. You suck. I hate
Oh,
you.
he just said
Everyone's-
you won't. So we can.
No, I mean, yeah, who's going to do that? I mean, in reality. Anyway, I don't know. This is really anyway. Confusing.
So we got the 9 and we've got the 1, the 10th. But the 10th is going to be something that's going to be just about impossible for us to get across. All right? He's going to continue developing. Let's read some more. The same dilemma confronts us when we consider what is meant by the word self. Who am I, really? Let's start with the obvious. As we shall see later on, this is precisely Chuang Tzu's advice on the matter. I am at this moment here, sitting in front of this computer, writing these words. Myself is in this body. Myself is in this body. Where? Well, I'm pretty sure it's not in my hair or my toenails, for I can cut them and nothing changes. I don't really want this to happen, but if my fingers or even my arms were to disappear, I would still have a self. If worse came to worse, they could even take my kidneys, lungs, or heart, and I could still have a sense of self. Only if they chopped off my head would my feeling of self cease to be, I think. So does that mean the self is in my head, my trunk, or somehow in their union? Let's place our bets on the head. Let's say the self is somehow bound up with the brain. No brain, no self. Now suppose I have a closed head injury. What parts of my brain can be damaged and rendered useless before self disappears? Suppose I could no longer walk, see, or speak. I would still have a sense of self. Suppose I had no memories and could not recall my name or where I live or grew up. Would I still have a self? It seems that the absence of memory would somehow make me less a self, for my identity would then seem somehow compromised. But would you be quite willing to say that I had no self? And what if only brainstem activity were left after my accident? Suppose, like Terry Schiavo, I lay in the hospital breathing and regulating body temperature, but hardly anything more. Would I still be myself? Much less so, you say. But are you at last willing to say I would then be completely, totally not a self? People argue, sometimes bitterly, about that one. Okay, thoughts about self. I thought he did a pretty good job of breaking that down.
Well, you'd have to have a brain to function to be self. You just, if you're brain dead, there's nothing left.
Well, he's going to argue. He's going to argue that point a little bit, George, as we get further on.
Okay. Well, I don't know, man. If you're dead, then your soul is going to take over, and then maybe you'll have self after that, right? Or still have self. I don't know. But,
Does anybody else have a sense of the seat of the self? Where does the self live? Well, regardless of where we think the self lives, the point he's making is going to be very important for us going forward. You know, what we understand as the self is going to be at issue here, because we're going to be setting up pairs of contradictions and paradox. And if we're ever going to get to the pivot of the Tao, to the resolution, or not even a resolution, but a way through this dilemma between the 9 types and the 10th type, between self and other, and so on and so forth, we're going to have to find that space in the middle. And that's going to make all the difference. So as he's kind of deconstructing our view of self and some other issues and the Enneagram and so on and so forth, he is laying the foundation for what he's going to bring us next. So the same problem arises when we look within. All we come upon is a ceaselessly changing landscape of thoughts, moods, imaginings, memories, and sensations. When we search for who is thinking, feeling, fantasizing, remembering, and sensing, however, we draw a blank. So, are we nothing more than the products of our mind? Or is there an unseen reality underneath them that is our true self? The question is structured exactly the same way as the one we asked about whether there are 9 or 10 types. And as we were with that question, we are left with a seemingly unanswerable dilemma. Either we are nothing but our categories of mind, or we are something so unseen and invisible that we can never quite catch hold of it. If we choose the first horn of the dilemma, our spiritual task becomes that of reconciling ourselves to the fate of being but an ephemeral shadow. If we elect the second, our duty is to meditate or pray until an inner spiritual spotlight finally illuminates everything from the viewpoint of the Godhead. It seems to me that we have ample testimony from our own lives and from the lives of those around us that neither alternative works very well, at least not for normal people. Finally, we encounter a similar dilemma regarding the divine. Whether we call it God or Brahman or Tao, it eludes us in the same way that objective truth and self elude us. At times, we may be convinced that this ultimate source is the only ultimately real and significant being, but we have to admit that it remains incomprehensible. At other times, we achieve a compelling sense that it is present within each limited and partial being, yet that awareness quickly seems to disappear from view. As with the first two questions about truth and self, we are left with a feeling that both options, there is but one reality worth knowing, and it is unknowable. The only reality we can know about it is the commonplace one we usually perceive, are somehow right and somehow wrong. So both options are somehow right and somehow wrong, because there's one reality worth knowing, but it's unknowable. The only reality we can know about is the commonplace one we usually perceive. So the pivot of Tao is an attempt to unravel these dilemmas. We spoke of it in previous chapters as we considered the point of transformation. Well, if you read the book in the right order, you would have, but we haven't.
Mm-hmm.
We spoke of it in previous chapters as we consider the point of transformation for each type, but we might apply it better if we understood it more deeply. As you already know, the metaphor for pivot of Tao is taken from the hole at the center of a wheel into which the axle is mounted. The hole is empty. It is nothing but a space. Yet the space is exactly what is necessary for the wheel to function. Were the space not there, the wheel could not be used. The metaphor is first introduced in the second chapter of the Chuang Tzu, one of the greatest Taoist texts, compiled more than 2,300 years ago. It may be the densest philosophical text ever written. It certainly is not easy for the Western reader. And if you just read the chapter, you'll know exactly what he's talking about. You know, he's going to give us some excerpts here. And so hopefully we can follow the train of thought for this pivot of the Tao. So it's the center of the wheel, you know. It's nothing. It's literally nothing. It's a space. It's not a thing that you can point to, a thing that you can define. It is a space. But without that space, nothing else works. Okay? Chapter 2 of the Chuang Tzu begins with a student observing his teacher, Ziki of Nankuo, deep in meditation. Ziki appears in a trance, as though he had lost the counterpart of himself, his opposite. When the teacher awakes, the student asks, "What is this? You are no longer the man I saw yesterday." Ziki replies, "This time I had lost my own self, my me." You hear the pipes of men, don't you? But not yet the pipes of earth. The pipes of earth, but not yet the pipes of heaven. The student isn't sure what Ziki means by this business of the pipes, but he still wants to know what it means to lose one's me, so he asks for the secret of it. The teacher's reply comes in the form of a parable. That hugest clumps of soil, the earth, blows out a breath by name the wind. Better if it were never to start up. For whatever it does, whenever it does, 10,000 hollow places burst out howling. And don't tell me you have not heard how the hubbub swells. The recesses in mountain forests, the hollows that pit great trees 100 spans around, are like nostrils, like mouths, like ears, like sockets, like bowls, like mortars, like pools, like puddles, hooting, hissing, sniffing, sucking, mumbling, moaning, whistling, wailing. The winds ahead sing out ah, and the winds behind answer e. The breezes strike up a tiny chorus, the whirlwind a mighty chorus. When the gale has passed, all the hollows empty, and don't tell me you have never seen how the quivering slows and settles. Means a lot to you, right? Now, the student doesn't realize for the moment that his teacher is describing the facts of meditation. Okay? Can you start to put that together with your own experience of meditation? He is really just struggling to keep up, and so he plays for time. So in meditation, right, you start out, all the winds are howling, your thoughts are buzzing, everything is filled, everything is chaotic. But if you ride it and you stay with it long enough, it finally subsides and moves down to silence. So he's talking about the meditation that he himself was in when his student first came upon him. And when he came out of the meditation, he's asking, you don't look like the same person you were yesterday. What has changed? And so this is where he's trying to take him, but he's talking to him about meditation itself. So the student doesn't realize for the moment that his teacher is describing the facts of meditation. He's really just struggling to keep up, so he plays for time. The pipes of earth, these are the various hollows. The pipes of men, these are rows of tubes. Let me ask about the pipes of heaven. The teacher doesn't bother to lecture his student about the pitfalls of literalism. He simply provides the student yet another clue to the original question about what it means to lose one's me. Blowing through the 10,000 differences so that each puts forth from itself, they all make their individualities from it. But who is the blower? Okay, and just to remind ourselves, when he talks about losing one's me, remember there were two parts of our personality, the I and the me. And the me was composed of content and structure. And so the me is everything that we can think about that is ourselves. It's our roles, our attributes, our accomplishments. It's everything that we can describe about us. And then the structure is the unconscious part. But that's all included in the me. The I is what is the ineffable essence part of ourselves that we can experience, but we can't describe. So he's talking about what does it mean in meditation to lose me? In other words, to lose everything that you think you know about yourself in any way that you come to identify yourself. And then he has another enigmatic line, blowing through the 10,000 differences so that each puts forth from itself, they all take their individualities from it. But who is the blower? Where is the source of this wind that is blowing through your meditation, blowing through yourself, making all of this move? What's the source of spirit, in other words, right? And the student still doesn't have a clue. So Ziki decides to slow everything down a bit. A few lines further on, he spells out for his students what all the noises of the wind represent. Pleasure in things and anger against them, sadness and joy, forethought and regret, change and immobility, idle influences that initiate our gestures, music coming out of emptiness, vapor condensing into mushrooms. Don't you love that line? Vapor condensing into mushrooms. I love that line. So he's talking about all the things that we think about, right? All our aversions, all our attractions, all that stuff that rattles around in there. In other words, the piping of men represents the categories of the mind. Our thoughts, moods, memories, plans, and sensations are noises produced by the wind. The real question remains, who does the blowing? The teacher, as is typical in Chuang Tzu, does not provide an immediate answer, only a further clue. Without another, there is no self. Without self, no choosing one thing rather than another. We talked about this stuff, I think, enough that maybe even an enigmatic line like that may make sense to you. Without an other, there is no self. We've talked about how identity is meaningless outside of its connection to something else, everything else, ultimately God. And without a sense of self, there is no choosing one thing rather than another. How do you make a judgment? How do you have any attraction or any aversion if there is no self, if there's no me, if all of those moods and thoughts and everything is blowing through? Here, the teacher is simply referring his student back to the original question of what does it mean to lose both one's opposite, the other, and one's me, the self. And that pointing back to the original question is the only answer he will give to the question of who blows the wind. Chuang-Tzu's final answer, given through the lips of Ziki, is that the self revealed in deep meditation is essentially a continuing question. Who am I? It's said that Francis of Assisi would spend all night just praying over and over again, who are you, Lord? And who am I? Who are you, Lord? And who am I? So that question of identity is at the center of everything. Who am I? Thomas Merton says that when you question the Bible, he has this tiny little book called Opening the Bible. Wonderful little book if you can get your hands on it. But he says, when you approach the Bible and ask, what book is this that I'm reading? The Bible is implied to be questioning you. Who is this that's reading it? And that's really the genius of sacred scripture. The genius of the Bible is not to try to figure it out literally, but to let it do its work of questioning you. Question of identity. Who do you know yourself to be as you walk down this path? Okay, that's a lot of stuff. Let's stop again. Just take a moment. Any reactions? I know what George's is going to be already, so.
I love it because it just points to the mysticism that we're seeking through the meditation, and it's not plainly spelled out. That would be so primal, and what's the point? But the deep seeking, and I was asking the question, that's probably the only question that would stand when you meet God face to face, because the answer is, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I don't belong here in light of who you are. But regardless, I don't ask questions and I don't look for answers anymore, but I live with the mystery and it's a lot more comfortable. So this feels good to me.
I've said over and over again that I think that Taoism is the closest to Jesus' teaching in another tradition. And you can just see Jesus' teaching style all over in this, can't you? I mean, Jesus teaches exactly the same way. It's a very Eastern way of teaching. The Buddhists have it, and it's just an Eastern way of teaching. It's even kind of wrapped up in the Socratic method as well, right? Where it's an ongoing dialogue in which truth is gradually revealed, but it's not just stated in a succinct answer. That's the way we really learn. And when it comes to something spiritual, there is no way to give an answer to any of the spiritual questions we ask, because the answer would be false, because you gave the answer, and for no other reason. You chose one side of the paradox, or one side of the contradiction. You picked a side, and said this is right and the other is wrong. As soon as you do that from a spiritual point of view, you're not in truth anymore, because truth doesn't work that way. Not spiritual truth, not existential truth. Yeah. Empirical truth, that's different. If you're going to build a bridge, you better know the tolerances and you better have it right. This is different. In fact, the next paragraph, why does he never give his students and us a direct answer to the question of who does the blowing? I mean, how many times have you asked that about Jesus? His own followers in the Gospels asked that of Jesus. Why don't you speak plainly? Why do you keep telling parables? Why do you keep telling stories? You're making us crazy. They don't understand. We don't understand. but it's because he knows that any answer will be false. The point of the question is that it cannot be answered in the ordinary conceptual way. The who that we're talking about here, who is the doing the blowing, is formless. It is presence itself, still, spacious, eternal consciousness. To turn it into an object of thought is to miss it entirely, for it is pure subject. So we can't answer the question and have it be true to what is ineffable, what is formless, what can't be described. And that's at once the frustration and the beautiful mystery, as Nina says, of the whole thing, right? Unfortunately, a lot of modern Christianity doesn't believe this and thinks that we can absolutely, detail and define the Godhead and doctrine and scripture and so on and so forth in a very literal way. And we can be right and everyone else is wrong. And of course, every tradition has that strain within it. And so that's where all the wars are fought, and the excommunications and all the betrayals and abuse comes from. But if we're really going to get to the essence of it, we know there are things that we can't answer, and we stop trying.
Just
So-
one more quick comment, Dave.
Go
Just
ahead.
the last sentence there. It is presence itself, still spacious, eternal consciousness. It just reminds me when God did reveal himself to Noah, who said, well, what's your name? And I am that I am. It's just like, oh, well, there's again, a name like right now I exist in this moment. And that's what we have. And that's the mystery of our whole being.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And to turn that into an object of thought is to miss it entirely, for it is pure subject. So as soon as we name it, we've killed it. And that's why we try not to name things in contemplative practice. We just want to experience them. Let them retain their mystery. Don't try to snapshot them in a thought. And then look at the snapshot as a living thing walks on by, which is what we do all the time. The next line is a really important one. Since Chuang Tzu cannot give a direct answer in objective terms, he can only point to what he means. And that's really what all the great teachers are doing. They're pointing. They're not just answering questions and saying this is right conceptually. The ones that do that are falling into literalism. They're falling into formalism or legalism. But the really great wisdom teachers don't do that. They point. They give us a direction, but they allow us to find our own way and to experience what is true, because that's the only way we can ever apprehend it anyway, is to experience it. One of his favorite ways of pointing is to tell a story, just like Jesus told stories all the time. In the last paragraphs of the chapter, he tells a story of Zhuang Zhao's butterfly dream, which you may recall from chapter 6. The real Zhuang Zhao is the one who, upon wakening, is unsure about whether he is the butterfly or Zhao the man. So in that dream, Chuang Tzu dreams that he is a butterfly, but when he wakes up, he realizes he's no longer sure if he's a man dreaming he was a butterfly or if he was a butterfly dreaming that he was a man. And so the question of identity, of course, is just flipping back and forth in that oscillating way that it does. His true self is found in the act of positing a question. Who am I? To which he gives no objective answer. Did you get that? I mean, that's great. His true self, this true self that we're trying to put a finger on, this blower of the wind that we're trying to define. But the true self is found in the act of positing the question, who am I? To which he gives no objective answer. So the one who is asking, who am I, is the true self. This is Zhuang Zi's final word on what is meant by losing one's me. That makes sense? That's as far as he goes. of what it means to lose one's me. It's to step aside from all of the thoughts we have about ourselves and reduce it down to the one who is asking, who am I? In other words, maybe it's kind of like step one of AA, right? When you finally admit that you're powerless over understanding who you are, now you can get someplace. All you can do is sit there and ask, who am I? Because if we answer the question, that's not it. In other words, to lose one's me is to stop taking a perspective and thus to refrain from positing an objective answer. When you affirm an objective answer, you have taken a particular perspective. This entails choosing one thing rather than another. Taking a particular perspective also implies a self, which has posited an other, object and subject, right? The sage does not do this. Like Ziki, he knows that without an other, there is no self. Without self, no choosing one thing rather than another. And so we have this contradiction, this paradox that needs to continue to stand. We don't choose in spiritual terms, but we use the horns of that paradox to experience the truth. Why does taking a perspective, having an opinion, or saying that something is true or false imply choosing one thing rather than another? I didn't read that very well. Why does taking a perspective, having an opinion, or saying that something is true or false imply choosing one thing rather than another? The Taoist would answer, by observing that knowledge is not just an impartial analysis performed by the intellect. It is also a choice springing from the heart. As previously noted, the Chinese character Xin, usually translated as mind, should actually be translated as heart-mind. Feelings always play a part in knowledge. Even scientifically derived concepts spring from a mind that has chosen a particular theoretical framework, a particular way of selecting the data, posing the question, and setting up the analysis. In everyday human interaction, the situation is even more driven by the heart. In daily life, we are usually far more deeply involved in choosing one thing rather than another. So even in the sciences, remember he said that the Western empirical way of knowledge was the one major tradition that assumed that it had no myth. Remember that from a couple pages back? The only one that assumes that it has no myth. And yet he's saying right here, of course it's still got a narrative. Of course it's still got a heart choice in it. You know, they've already chosen that theoretical framework, particular way of selecting the data, posing the question, setting up analysis. So there is already an assumption there. There is already a quote unquote myth. In everyday human interaction, the situation is even more driven by the heart. In daily life, we are usually far more deeply involved in choosing one thing rather than another. And that's what Jesus is telling us not to do. Don't judge, don't choose. Don't say this is right and this is wrong, because as soon as we do that, we're far from the truth. Now, in everyday life, of course, we do need to choose. In everyday day life, we do need to discern things. But when it comes to the spirit, that's going to take us in the wrong direction. And not only that, the observer and the observed are absolutely linked. And quantum mechanics shows us this, you know. The subatomic particles, I mean, you could kind of say they don't actually exist. At least they don't exist in any space-time until you look at them. Once you put them under the glass, then they appear as a particle. Otherwise, they're just a wave. They're just a probability of possibly existing. But as soon as you look at them, then they exist. Life is like that, you know.
Dave, just can I make another comment? What
Sure.
you're making me think of, you know, life is so many lessons to be learned. And I have learned lessons by suffering consequences of making mistakes by bad choices. And I could have 10 people telling me, this is what you should do, or guidance or whatever, but I have to experience it. So I think many times experience is putting gasoline in the car, because without the gasoline, without an experience, we're empty and it's just a lot of words and noise. But the
Mhm.
gasoline gets us far enough to begin a journey that ultimately leads to a spiritual awakening, which to me, there's a great world of difference between the initial spiritual experience and the ultimate spiritual awakening. When one is almost definable, yeah, I had that moment and this happened and I was changed or I was set on a path. But a spiritual awakening is like, how did I change? When did all this happen? It's like, just going back to addiction treatment, it's like, when did I become an alcoholic? It befuddles us, but it's the same principle. How did this transformation take place? The crossing and the making of a whole new form. The word trans, which we hear all day, every day in any field or philosophical pursuit, trans, what does trans mean? Trans means crossing or to cross over. And then if we're looking for spiritual formation, it's the making of a form. Now, that kind of is another paradox because in our pursuit of spiritual transformation, we're not looking for a form, but a way of experiencing a reality I don't put words to.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. Makes sense to me. And as we're reading through this, you might be just thinking, what is all this? Why do I need to know this? It's kind of like algebra, trigonometry. I hated trigonometry. I have not used it since I had to pass the last test I took. Why do I need this? But here's the key. He's belaboring a point here and he's using various ways to get us to the idea that if we think that the Enneagram has something specific to show us, if it's going to show us that we are one of 9 types that have wings and have this and have all this, if we're really looking at it to give us some specific piece of knowledge, then we're always going to be banging our heads against this as any real tool for spiritual transformation. It's not going to work for us. We'll have to understand that what we are actually after is something that can't be named. It's something that nobody can tell us. It's something that will need to be experienced. And so to have a handle on some of these, really, as he calls them, dense philosophical paradoxes in life, is to help us as we approach the Enneagram from this Taoist point of view, which is also Jesus' point of view. They're one and the same in terms of this way of looking at life. And so if we can get a little bit of this foundation underneath us as we move forward, then we're going to be digging in the right spot as we start using the Enneagram for our spiritual work. So he continues. In the middle of the chapter, Chuang-Tzu moves ever more deeply into the reason why Tao is obscured. And remember, Tao is this way of the universe, this way of all life, the flow of the spirit, as we would call it in Christian tradition. This flow of spirit, this ultimate reality is obscured. That is, why is it not better observed by humans? He begins a particularly dense section by saying that the way is flawed due to the lighting up of that's it or that's not it. That's it is the way modern translators render the Chinese ideograph that signifies the act of affirming, okay, saying yes to something. The ideograph is read she, an affirmation. But the affirmation is not just of fact. She means that's it. The way you might say to a child who has just gotten the hang of riding his bike without training wheels, that's it. Fei means that's not it, but with opposite emphasis. Ordinary people are said to she fei constantly, always, of course, from their personal point of view. Think of our 9 and 6 arguing about what made them so upset with each other. This brings us finally to the pivot of Tao. Chuang-Tzu's language grows ever denser as he strives to shake us out of our ordinary modes of thinking. Okay, you ready? This is also that. That is also this. This has its own this, that, she, fei, and that also has its own this, that, she, fei. So is there really a this, that, or isn't there? When this and that no longer find anything to their opposites, this is called the pivot of Tao. When this and that no longer find anything to be their opposites, all right? When this and that no longer find anything to be their opposites, this is called the pivot of Tao. Once the pivot finds the center so that it can respond infinitely without obstruction, this self-right is unobstructed and inexhaustible. And that other wrong is equally unobstructed and inexhaustible. This is why I said there's nothing better than using the obvious. The text is so thick that we have to pry it apart piece by piece. The light of Tao is obscured when we choose one thing rather than another. The first party to any argument of this has his unique Shifei, his own perspective, whereas the other, the that, takes another, usually opposite Shifei as his own. In the example we have been using, each party has taken a stand in self, making the second party other. The 6 is stuck in, you thwarted me, while the 9 is stuck in, you demonized me. Each asserts he speaks the truth and the other falsehood. Thus, Tao is obscured. The only place from which awareness of Tao can be restored is the pivot of Tao. It is a place that can be reached only when a person loses both his me and its counterpart, his opposite. That is, self and other are reciprocal. They form a system in which each entails the other. I cannot be me unless I make someone else other. I cannot be this unless I make someone else that. And I cannot be right unless I make someone else wrong. So we're back to not making choices between the paradoxes and the contradictions. That one line that he says, that is, self and other are reciprocal. They form a system in which each entails the other. So that's kind of it sounds like a kind of odd use of the word entail for us. But what entail means is to impose, to involve, or to imply something as being absolutely necessary as an accompaniment to whatever it is that they're doing, or as a result. So they form a system in which each makes the other, right, absolutely necessary as accompaniment or as result. So the whole process doesn't exist without the other. You need the other. I cannot be me unless I make someone else other. I cannot be this unless I make someone else that. And I cannot be right unless I make someone else wrong. So these are the choices that we make in a dualistic, typical worldview when we're thinking of everything in terms of pairs, right and wrong, and light and dark, and male and female, so on and so forth. In a literalist point of view, where there is one right answer and everything else is wrong. But when you get to the pivot of Tao, then these dualities don't have any meaning. And that's where we're trying to get to, where we stop making these choices. We allow ourselves to just be in presence. Now, that doesn't mean you can live life that way. We're talking about spirituality, right? We're talking about in an existential way. If we're really looking for this truth, then we're not going to find it by making these kind of judgments. Clear as mud?
Mm-hmm.
Questions, thoughts?
No, it's just you're spiritual and then human form. We have to do different things, right? So you can't just be a dot on the wall. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
In your everyday life, but in your spiritual life, to seek the truth is you can't do. You have to do the opposite. Is that what you're saying?
In our everyday physical lives, we're going to have to make choices. Obviously, we have to make choices. And even if we say we're not going to judge, which is forming a conclusion based on a preset standard that we carry around in our heads, We're still going to have to discern, which is forming a judgment based on what we actually experience, what we observe. We have to make those kind of choices or we can't live. And so when we're talking about just living everyday life, yes, of course, we're going to have to discern, we're going to have to choose, we're going to have to choose one thing over another, and so on and so forth. But when we get to the essence of who we really are, when we get to the essence of who God really is, when we get the essence of what does a spiritual relationship even mean? What does it mean for me to transform, to awaken spiritually? Well, if we use the same judgmental criteria that we use for life, we're not going to get anywhere. And we're just going to be banging our head against the wall. And so that's where we need to go to the pivot of the Tao, that space that can't be defined because it's just a space. But without it, nothing turns, nothing happens. And so to get to that center place where there isn't these dualities between right and wrong and this and that, that's where we're going to start to have some answers that we'll never be able to explain to anybody else or even to ourselves in words. But we'll have experienced it and we can be convinced of it and it can start to reorder a transformed life.
You know, what comes to my mind, I don't know if I can express this very clearly, but I think I've made observations at different points in time when I've come into some understanding of a relationship between two people, and they are very different in their approaches to life. And yet they were drawn. There was an attraction there. There was almost a complementarity in and how they fit together. And yet there were tensions also that would erupt periodically because of the differences. And I think I'm not sure I can say this right, but I'm suspecting that this pivot of Tao somehow is that if you can find that space in between the joys and the tensions, that relationships can survive. I'm not sure if that makes sense to anybody, but I don't know. I mean, being in Al-Anon for quite a while, I just see when you stand there long enough, you hear people's stories as they evolve. And they start out with blaming the alcoholic. Help me figure out how to fix the alcoholic. And slowly they come to see that, oh, this is not about them. This is about me and what I'm not doing right. And when that starts to unfold in new ways, there is a softening that happens and more compassion that can come in between the two parties, I think.
That's perfect, Judy. That's great. You know, another way to put it maybe is that when a relationship is getting started, it's very important for each party to determine who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah.
Right? And to set these boundaries and to set the playing field and the levels and the hierarchy and all that sort of. If the relationship lasts long enough and really moves into a deep, mature relationship, it's not about who's right or wrong anymore. Right and wrong doesn't even enter the picture. It's just what we learn and what we experience in just the living together. It's just that abrasion, that bumping up against each other.
Right.
And right and wrong just doesn't even enter into the picture.
Yeah.
There is a question of what may work or not work better for things that the family is trying to do or the couple is trying to do, certainly, but it's not about assigning that blame you were talking about. It's not about assigning that rightness or wrongness to each other. It's just about continuing to be together.
Right.
Yeah. And I think built into that pivot as well is recognizing that all of our strengths are weaknesses,
Yeah.
right? So you find yourself attracted to certain aspects of people, and then we dislike that very quality in others.
Right. It's so true.
You know? And, yeah, so it's that field out there beyond right and wrong.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. There's
That
Ruby.
poem becomes more and more brilliant the deeper you move into
Mhm.
contemplative practice.
Yeah.
And what you were just talking about too, and think about what Paul says, when I'm weak, then I'm strong, right? It's that same idea that you're talking about here.
Mhm. Mhm.
When you get to a certain point, these things start to become clear.
Yeah.
You know, you can say them, but they may not mean anything to someone who hasn't experienced what it is you're talking about yet. But at least you don't not say it because of that. You still say it. You know,
Mhm.
it becomes a value that maybe is out there someplace, but it can validate them when they finally do have the first experience of what you're talking about. And then that rings in the head. Oh, okay, now I get it. Now I understand. And it
Yeah.
puts a more firm cap on it. And so it's
Mhm.
important for us to try to express what's inexpressible, do the best
Mhm.
we can,
Yeah.
just knowing that the words will never really be understood until the person, any listener, has experienced it for themselves. And then it'll make sense, you know, not in the words themselves, but in the experience of it.
Mhm.
And you know, when as I think about the Enneagram, in the bit of knowledge that I've accumulated of it, each kind of description of the profiles that are there, um, each of them have incredible beauty and assets and flaws.
Mhm.
And yet I think all of them are needed
Mhm.
for us to really start to get into more of a spiritual acceptance of how needed they all are to
Mhm.
make this entire universe work.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But just to kind of put a little bow on the end of this section, um, a couple of sentences that we already read. I cannot be me unless I make someone else other. I cannot be this unless I make someone else that. I cannot be right unless I make someone else wrong. In our earlier example, each of the warring parties has done exactly this. The 6 says, you have thwarted me. Without you, I would be whole and happy. The 9 retorts, you have misunderstood and libeled me. Without you, I would be unblemished and well respected. Seen only from his own perspective, each is entirely correct. For all available evidence supports his vision of how things are. How can they escape their respective viewpoints?
Mm.
Chuang Tzu tells us that the escape starts from where they no longer find anything as opposite. That is, when they escape from the entire system that makes self and other necessary, that dualistic system, right? They can only do this when they realize that each of them includes, indeed necessarily implies, the other. That is, the thwarted one needs the thwarting one, and the libeled one requires the libeling one in order to maintain their identities as thwarted and libeled. Each believes his sense of self proceeds from the other, because from the limited perspective of each, this is the only possible truth. Yet, from the perspective of the pivot, each one's deepest self is prior to the other's appearance into his life. And from that vantage, all individual truths become one great truth. From their limited perspectives, each has a different opinion of the other, and thus they are opposite. Yet from the perspective of the pivot, each one's opinion of the other is identical, in that each opinion is made up of a this, that, self, other, right, wrong. In fact, it is precisely the choice of this, that, self, other, and right, wrong that creates the sense of being thwarted or misunderstood in the first place. And from that viewpoint, it does not matter much which one is thwarted and which one is libeled, for they are both suffering and in need of great compassion, both for themselves and for one another.
Mhm.
Well written.
Wow, that's for sure.
Okay. We've only got a couple of pages left that we will hit next week. And I would encourage you maybe to think about some of this stuff. Maybe reread some of it. Some of the stuff that seems so dense, so incomprehensible. See if you can at least tease out a comment or a question that we can talk about next week. And we'll go ahead and finish this appendix, and then we'll go back and start at part 1 with the roots. So, but it would be a good moment for us next week to flesh out some of this stuff if you have some questions or just parts that just still don't make any sense or things you find particularly beautiful.
Can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
This is because I've missed so much, and so I'm probably the only one with this question, but has everybody already taken a test to figure out what they are, what number they are?
Most of us have. Has anybody
Yeah.
not? Has anyone not? You
I
give me
haven't. Yeah.
Did you get
Well,
did you get the initial email that we sent out, Lindy?
If I did, I don't recall it, and it's probably so far into my
Okay.
box now.
It had a link to a website that had a test that you could take, 180 question test.
there's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can
I
take that
wanted to
one.
do it, but I realized online there's all different websites, and I thought, I don't know which one is recommended. And
Mm.
so how do I get that link again if I
I
can't?
will send it to you.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Is there a charge to it? Because some of them
No.
are charging you. No?
Yeah, Kathy found this link for us, and one of the criteria
okay.
was that it was comprehensive enough, it had enough questions to it, and it also cost nothing.
Aha.
So
Yes.
He also referred to one in the front part of the book that we ran through, which I didn't know, but it might be one that cost something. So we
Yeah.
did find that it was free. So
yeah, at the
Well,
beginning of the book, he lists a link
Yeah.
to go to another online test that he recommends as well. So
Okay, well, if you send it to me, I'll do it.
I will do so. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Everybody's noodle really baked right now.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, really.
it is
This
truly.
is
Fascinating.
we're getting right down to it now. When it comes to really teaching deep spiritual truths, this is the only language that can point us in the right direction. It doesn't answer questions, it points us in a direction, but it also has a point of view, right? So it has a philosophy from which all this comes, obviously, but still is only pointing us. So do the best you can with it. But if something really just doesn't make sense, please ask the question, because even if you think it's a stupid question or you should know this, believe me, if you're asking it, half the class is asking it. It's just the way it always works. So let's talk about it. Let us know what it is that's not making sense so we can talk about it. We get the richest part of all of this is in the discussions that we have. So maybe we'll get a chance to do some of that next week. Okie dokie.
Okay.
All right. Where are you, Scott? There you are. Go ahead, Scott.
Father God, we thank you for this time and the information that we're putting away for future use and how it's going to affect us. And you gave us such capabilities, whether it's to memorize things or just find an appreciation for things or a deep study and contemplation. And there's so much that's here to absorb. So we want to thank you for what we're going through right now and what we're going to learn as we continue our journey. And the fun that we can have when we explore these things and these concepts and these ideas. And we're just grateful, Lord. We're very grateful. It's in your precious name, Lord Jesus, that we give our thanks and say our amens and let you know that we're just excited to see what comes next, Lord. We love you, Father. It's in your holy, precious name we pray and we give our thanks and say our amens. Amen.
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 Thank you,
Amen.
Scotty.
You got
Thanks,
it, guys.
everybody.
Thank you, guys.
We will see you Sunday.
Good night.
Good night, guys.
Sunday.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Diana. Bye, sweetie.
Bye.
Jordana. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, good night.
Take care, Kat.
Good night, Kat. Good night, Nina.
Bye. Oh, there's
Good night,
Jamie.
Nina. Good night,
Hi,
George.
Jamie. Hi, Jamie. Good to see you, dear.
I'm eavesdropping.
That,
Hi,
that
Jamie.
is all right with
Hi.
us. Eavesdrop as much as you want. You can
Hi,
put your
Scott.
face in the frame if you
Hi,
want.
Jordana.
Hi.
Hey, Jordana. See
Bye.
you on
See you
Sunday, dear.
Sunday. All right.
Okay.
Hey,
Bye.
guys.
Bye, Scott.
Take care,
Bye,
guys. Good night.
Jordana.
Bye.
Bye. We'll see you